Okay, doke. So this is the video lesson that I promised just a few minutes ago um, on the essay, and I'm going to dig out an example for you to follow. So I'm hoping that this is going to be very useful and reassuring, so you know exactly what you're going to do. You've all in that class established that you can use the link, the Turnitin link, so you can all upload your essay as a Word document when the time comes. I've advised you that the link is open now, so if you wish, you can write the essay. Oh, wait until Rachel's class next Thursday, so you've got some guidance on how to think about and write about sound, but you could write the essay next week and get it out of the way. But at the very latest, you'll be submitting it by 4 o'clock on, now, is it a Friday? It's the 12th of November. I've put it up 4 o'clock so that you're not spoiling your Friday night. And I know in some courses, some universities, they use midnight, which I think is kind of weird. Okay, so very quickly, this is what I've gone through in the class. First, in terms of the content of your essay and the actual analysis of the essay, and then I'll get on to the kind of presentation of the essay. So in the lectures, I've given out a lot of information. I've suggested you approach the essay as 4 main sections. I should add, it's really up to you how you write this, but I think this is a kind of foolproof method. So I recommend you do this and save yourself problems. But do feel free to divert if there are areas that you want to cover that you feel are important, but I'm not really touching on them, or the sections themselves perhaps are a bit limiting for you. So in the first section, you've got to identify the pattern of the narrative, the use of the obstacles to develop the story and to engage and maintain our attention. I hope by now that that's fairly straightforward for you. And then second, which is a bit trickier because we start talking in a more specific way about how the film focuses our attention on characters and how it encourages to view the story from particular perspectives. So we've been doing that today in relation to Psycho. And just as in our discussion of Psycho, in the essay, you should consider the use of techniques of framing and editing to help the viewer comprehend the narrative, and in the ways they contribute to the viewer's engagement with the film, and the extent to which the techniques create points of view which encourage our alignment with characters and our identification with characters, and also our disalignment, I suppose. I mean, in Psycho, the camera has to disalign from Marion after being with her for so long. Thirdly, you should look closely at the scene where Dallas is killed as a way of demonstrating your understanding of how techniques of framing, editing, and sound create cinematic experiences of suspense and shock. And again, we've done a bit of this today in Psycho, looking at the scene in the car, and if we wanted to, we could go into much more detail with the shower scene, but there's enough in that car scene to get an insight into how cinematic narration can create these particular experiences. And in this section, the question that you're really addressing is, how can cinematic techniques be used to create intensely dramatic screen space and screen time? Okay, think about that. Intensely dramatic screen space and screen time. We need to be eased into this, just as we're eased into Psycho's story before we get the real intensity. We're eased into Alien's story before we start to experience a truly dramatic screen space and screen time. The fourth section is an opportunity for you to evaluate the film in terms of its success as a viewing experience for you. It's the section that allows you to provide more of your own opinion about what you find truly interesting about the film. Remember, it can be your own opinion, but it's got to be evidence-based. So it needs to be, really, it should come out of what you've already said. You know, on the basis of what I've said about narrative structure, the creation and overcoming of obstacles, the focalization of the narrative through the agency of character X, Y, and Z, the use of cinematic techniques to create shock, suspense, tension, and shock. I consider the film to be an exercise in manipulation that I find immersive. Or you might want to take it into a different direction and talk about how you find the film to be an interesting development of a character who overcomes obstacles in a way that suggests a relationship to gender power and the establishment of a new female hero in the shape of Ripley's character. Okay, so that's the stuff that I would expect you already know, and you should go onto the slides that I'm putting up tomorrow from week 4's class on Psycho and look at the last slides. I think it's slides 19, 20, 21, 22, there or thereabouts. Follow those, and I don't think you can go wrong. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and I'm going to see if I can give you an insight into what this essay will look like. Okay. Okay. So I hope you can all see that. I tell you what, I'm going to read it first because I know that it's probably what most people are interested in. You know, how does somebody write an essay on this topic? So I'll just read it. So typically a narrative begins with one situation, a series of changes occurs according to a pattern of cause and effect. Finally, a new situation arises that brings about the end of the narrative. Quote from Bordwell and Thompson. As Buckland also confirms, not only are film events linked by a cause and effect logic, but film structures consist of 3 stages. A beginning, a state of equilibrium is introduced. A middle, the equilibrium is disrupted. And an end, a successful attempt to restore the equilibrium. So there's no surprise in noticing that Alien perfectly follows this pattern. As soon as the film starts, the establishing shots of the spaceship helps us locate the setting of the narrative and introduce an initial state of affairs, quoted from Buckland. Thanks also to a superimposed title that tells us that the Nostromo is a commercial vehicle returning to Earth, we assume that the crew has been in space for a certain amount of time and everything is as it should be, equilibrium. As the crew discovers the cause of their sudden awakening, an SOS signal coming from a proximal planet, the first sign of disequilibrium is introduced and the plot develops through a series of events linked by cause and effect. In fact, having to investigate its source, a creature attaches itself to one of the members and they later set off home with it. By the end of the movie, the alien gets killed and a new equilibrium replaces the old one. As Buckland continues, in addition to this general structure, specific techniques can be found in narratives. Obstacles that prevent the characters from reaching the goal are what create disequilibrium. In Alien, all the characters have one common goal, return to Earth. The first obstacle emerges when the crew realize that the spaceship not only is not heading home, but it's also not in the solar system, and as a cause of these initial obstacles, all others will follow. Okay, I'll stop there. So you've got an idea. Now, first of all, let me say, I can read that out because you can't copy it. You can't copy it even if you want to, and I would be tempted to, but you can't copy it because Turnitin, which is the system that takes in the essays, has what's called a similarity function, where it will check the similarity of all essays to those which are already available, which have already been submitted at UWS, at other universities. Anything that's been published on the internet will be part of this check. So and what happens is the text shows up in red, and then it actually gives the source of the information that's being used. And if an essay gets is consistently uses sources that are uncredited, then the essay will be given a 0 mark and be sent to the school's plagiarism panel. Because plagiarism is taken very seriously. Plagiarism sounds scary, but usually, especially for new students, plagiarism is just the result of people not knowing how to reference. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the referencing here so that nobody gets caught out. But please do not cut and paste from anything that's been submitted previously for UWS, any other university, anywhere, any journal, magazine you find, it all shows up. In fact, you'll be able to see it, I think. I think students can see their own similarity check. The bibliography doesn't count in the similarity check because there are lots of uses of the bibliographical information, the book lists of books and all that kind of thing. But if it's text, then it does show up. So don't be caught out. So let's have a look. I think this is a good essay. It's not perfect. It has weaknesses. There are things wrong. So maybe I can talk a little bit about it to give you my opinion on where it's working and where it perhaps needs to be slightly different. First, notice that it doesn't have a title at the top. I prefer to have the essay title, the short version of the essay title at the top, so that I can then refer to it when I'm marking it. This essay, in fact, had a separate title page, but I'm not sure if that's a great idea. So perhaps consider putting the essay question, just not the extended one that I've put on slides, but just the very brief, how does alien work question. And then it begins with a quotation, which is quite good. Essays often begin with quotations. If you look at chapters in books, they'll often begin with quotations. It's not essential, but this one does kind of set the scene for the initial part of the essay. I would perhaps be tempted to start with an opening sentence that states clearly what it is that I am going to do in this essay. So I'm going to look at techniques of narrative structuring and cinematic narration to demonstrate how Alien works as a viewing experience that engages, retains, and satisfies the viewer, okay, the viewer's attention. Something like that, a general opening. And then you get into the first section. So this student's gone into the first section, which is on narrative structure. That's fine, that's all working well. Actually, perhaps worth pointing out the presentation. Note that it's very plain. It's plain and clear. That's good. Black typeface. I don't know what the typeface is, but something boring like Arial's good. 12-point or 14-point. I'm not looking for a specific style of presentation, but keep it plain, clear, and easy to read. Double space is good. This looks more like maybe 1.5 or double, I think. Margins here are about 3 centimeters. I think that's a minimum that you want. Okay, so very clear, clean presentation, nothing fancy, no use of color or anything like that. And I wouldn't put images in this essay. You can put images in other essays, but don't put them in this essay. Okay. So perhaps another word on the tone. The tone itself is quite plain. It's formal. It's objective. It's not chatty. It doesn't use slang. You know, it should be film rather than movie, for example. So do keep it, without being too stiff, do keep it relatively formal and objective. So you're not talking to your pal about the film, you're addressing an unknown reader. So you want it to be very clear, very sensible, and don't make the use of language an obstacle to understanding. Simple words, a few technical terms, but it doesn't have to be an extremely complicated use of language. Sentences should be brief. They should make one point and then move on. Paragraphs should make a major point and then go to another paragraph. Perhaps here we might want to break it down a bit further into paragraphs, but certainly it's fairly clear, it's clean. I can read it. I just read it out and it's quite readable. Okay. The quotations themselves, just having a look at the referencing. So that's almost right. When you have a quotation like that, first of all, note that it is separated from the rest of the text. And you do that when you want the quotation to stand out. So this one is right at the top of the essay, so it needs to stand out. Or if it's a very long quotation. Generally speaking, if your quotation is more than 2 lines, you know, it might be one sentence, but if it's 4 lines, that's a long quotation. So I would say anything more than 2 lines should be indented and treated as a long quotation to separate it out from the text. All your other quotations, if you're putting phrases or sentences within 2 lines, they can go in the body of the text. We'll get an example of that in a moment, I think. The indentation should be even, so both edges should have the same distance from the side. This one isn't quite right. So if your margin is 3 centimeters, I would say your indentation should be 5 centimeters on either side to make a clear distinction with the rest of the text. I don't think your essay should have many long and therefore indented quotations. You need to have some reference to material, but you don't want long quotations because then other writers are doing the work for you. Better to paraphrase, put it in your own words. But nevertheless, this is an example of a quotation that works well. And then we get, interestingly, immediately below it, another author reference, Buckland, 2003, and this quotation is actually a paraphrase. So we don't need the same amount of information, okay? It's just an acknowledgement that the writer of this essay isn't making this up themselves. They are referring to the work done by another writer. Just a quick word about the presentation of the information for a reference. As I said, it's almost right, but it should be, rather than Bordwell and Thompson, it should be the surname followed by the initial. So Bordwell, comma, D for David, full stop. Yeah. And then I would put a comma and put Thompson, comma, Kristen for K for Kristen, full stop. Okay. So the normal way of referencing your quotations is to put the author followed by the date of publication, whichever text you're using, followed by the page number. Date, author, date, page number. It's getting late. It's been a long day. Okay. One thing I would just point out is, I know it seems like nitpicking, but you may as well get off to the right start with referencing that now. It's author, comma, date, and then colon, and then just the number, 79. So I would have written this 2010, comma, 79. That's just the way that, look in books, and you'll see that that's the way that information's referenced. With the other quotation that follows from Buckland, we only need the date of publication, so I can then go to the bibliography and see which book's being referred to. But it's a general paraphrase, so it's not one particular page. It could be a number of chapters, or it could be a section. If you want to be more specific, you can put the pages and say 22 to 20, 23 colon 22 to 27. That shows you really have looked at the stuff. Okay. Bear in mind that you can, I'll put up a different document on basic referencing. Once you get into it, it's dead straightforward. So it's author, data publication, page number for the first one, and then author and data publication because it's a paraphrase. Then the next thing to note here is at the first mention of the title of the film, we are given in brackets the director and its initial date of release. So Alien, brackets, Ridley Scott, comma, 1979, close brackets. Only do that the first time that you write the title of the film. We don't want Ridley Scott 1979 to appear again. Okay, it'll just be Alien after this. However, Alien should always be in italics as it is there. All film titles, and indeed all book titles, always should go in italics. Okay. Interestingly, following this, in the next couple of lines, we've got a different, slightly different kind of quotation where we do have a direct quotation, but it's not long enough to indent. It's just a phrase, an initial state of affairs. So then the writer gives us Buckland 2003 and gives us the page number 37. As I say, I would put 2003 colon 37. But this is okay if it's the first essay, and by the time you get up to the second, then your referencing should be perfect. But you do need to show some attempt at referencing. Also, you have to get to grips with it because in later modules, you can be failed for not completing the referencing properly. You just need to get used to academic writing and the presentation of academic writing. Okay, I'm not sure if there's anything else. I don't really want to discuss exactly how the writer approaches the material. I think it's fine. I think it's good. I couldn't disagree with anything, and it's going in the right direction. I would expect this section to go on for a bit further before concluding with some evaluation about the specific pattern that's been introduced, and then go into the second section on the focalization through characterization that I talked about right at the beginning. Okay, one last point that I'll make here is that note how the writer gets straight into it. There's no mucking about. We don't have any build up by talking about, I don't know, Ridley Scott or the franchise. There's nothing about the script development. There's nothing about the production. None of that will earn you any marks. So don't waste time. It just appears like padding in this kind of analytical essay. So even though it's interesting, forget about it. Just get stuck in and start the analysis as this writer has done straight away. This is very good in that respect. Okay, so I can't show you any more of the essay, but what I will do is just go to the end to have a look at how those references are finally presented at the end of the essay. I mean, I'll speed through it and you'll just see, it's just in paragraphs, dead simple, and I would actually put page numbers on so that when I'm marking it, I can refer to the page numbers. That would be helpful for me. But there's nothing else there that is of great interest. It's just a very clear, simple presentation that continues as it started in that formal academic fashion. So here we've got some, at the end of the essay, you have a section on, probably best to do it on a separate page. These references don't count towards your word count. Remember, this essay has a target wordage of 1,500 words, but as with all assignments on this course, you can be 10% over or under. So you could, that means you can be 150 words over or under. So it could be 1,650 or 1,450. Personally, I think 1,500 is perfect. That's why I put it at 1,500. I think if it's I said 1,400, 1,350. I think 1,350 is really at the edge, you know, of suggesting that you're not really that interested. 1,500, you can do something substantial without having to then go into a whole different level of detailed discussion and perhaps getting into other areas. You might want to, I'm sure some of you will want to go a wee bit over 1,500, but don't go over 1,600, 1,650, definitely not. You know, I would say 1,600 maybe max is ideal. Just have a look at how this is set up. First of all, I would call this bibliography, okay, but I'm not really bothered. But I would put bibliography and get used to putting bibliography. You'll see that we get the names of the authors presented correctly. We get the date of publication. We then get the title, which is almost right. It's in italics, but it's underlined. Now, underline is actually a traditional printer's mark for underline this word or these words. So that's redundant. So I would take the underline out and just have the italicization, okay? Then we have information that the book is from the 9th edition. If it is an edition, put that. We then have the place of publication and the publisher. So that's the same for every reference of a source that you put in your bibliography. And it doesn't matter whether it's print, online, wherever it comes from, it's author, date, title, place of publication, publisher. The same for all of them. Okay, so if you do something more or less like that, the main issue there is the underlining, which is unnecessary. Do one last word on that. Do reference sources that are truly useful. Don't put a quotation in if it's something that you could say just as well. You know, if it's a really kind of general description or a general statement or evaluation, well, you can do that. Use your own words. But if it's a technical thing, like the Bordwell quote at the top is expressing a concept about narrative, well, that's different. And you want to draw upon experts in the available literature when you're quoting about conceptualization or analytical techniques. Yeah, but otherwise, just use your own words. Keep it plain. Never quote from lectures. If you're using a source, say if you're using something I've drawn upon from Buckland, go to the original and find Buckland and do your own version of it. But don't put me in. Don't put, you know, Andrew Jarvis in October. That would be embarrassing for all of us. So just find the right sources, use your textbooks, think about what Ray said about finding a bit more. See, look really interesting. What can you find in the library that's going to be useful, not just for the sake of it, but that's going to add to the value of your essay and help you make the argument clearly and strongly. Use journals if you come across any, but really it's the textbooks that are most useful. And I'm quite happy for you to limit it to relatively few textbooks, you know. I don't want fan sites. I don't want reviews. I definitely don't want, what's his name, Roger Ebert. I can't stand that guy. Don't want DVD commentaries. None of that is going to get you where you need to be with this, which is in an analytical mode, not telling stories and not talking about stuff that circulates around the film. It's just the film itself and how the film works. Okay, so what I'm going to do is also put up a feed with, and I'll call it Alien Question, and then you can ask your own questions and anyone can join in. I'd much prefer it when other people do join and answer the questions. It's much better all around. And we can have some kind of ongoing discussion as it's required over the next couple of weeks as you move towards completion. Okay, that's me.